Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of A Contagious Smile, where every smile tells a story. And what a smile we have with JaneA today. She is amazing. She has such a story, and she has the coolest hair. Like, that's the very first thing I said to her. Your hair is so amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for being here with us today and finding the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's much appreciated.
Well, you are a force to be reckoned with. You are a member of the LGBT community, and your pronouns, make sure I remember them, they, them, and theirs.
Mhm.
Right. I'm still learning all of that. And so I'm trying to,
It's okay. I'm not going to get all bent out of shape about
okay.
it.
But I never want to insult. I want to make sure I
Right.
represent correctly. So, all right. You are also award-winning author, which is amazing. You're a health advocate, mental health advocate, which we need so much of right now. It's we don't have enough of them, honestly. And you're just like a plethora of inspiration and light. And I'm just so glad you're here. You have such a story, and I'm so glad you're on the other side of it. We have so many people who aren't, that are still there, or they just came out of it, and you're going to be able to give so much help to them as well. So I thank you in advance for that. Let's kind of start at the beginning. From birth to about 5, you had to watch domestic violence within your own household.
Yeah, there was it was I would say a lot. Like when I was home with my mother, everything was great and she was teaching me how to read and we were rehabilitating birds and doing all this stuff. But when my father was home, everything
Changed.
was different.
Yeah.
Um, And I could feel, like, even as a 2 or 3 year old, you know how you feel the tension rising because you can tell just sort of by the tone of somebody's voice or that they're just a little tight, that you can tell that things are escalating and it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And that happened at the dinner table. So I learned to eat really fast because I just wanted to get out of there.
Right, right. And that uncomfortability at such a young age. What do you remember how you coped with it? What were your mechanisms for helping?
Well, I I really didn't know how to do anything different. I didn't have really the tools to emotionally process it, also just because of my like the stage of development you are when you're
Sure.
that age, but
Right.
also because I never saw it modeled how to practice good emotional self-control and emotional hygiene and letting go of stuff that isn't yours.
Right. Because you
So I
know
took a
you,
lot of it on board.
yeah. Oh, that is awful. So from the age of up to 5, you watched that. What happened at 5 that made the domestic violence stop?
My mother finally was able to leave. So it was 1974, and that year was the first year that a woman could take out a mortgage or get credit on her own. Before that, she had to do it with her husband's co-signature. So I think that having that law in effect made it possible for my mother to leave because she knew that like she would be able to um,
Provide.
financially care for us, get us a house, things
Right.
like that.
Right.
Um, and there was also a really serious domestic violence episode that was kind of bloody, and I don't want to go into the details
Of
because I don't
course.
want to trigger anybody.
No.
But that led her to understand that if she didn't leave, he was going to kill her. And if he killed her, my brothers and me would be left alone with him. And she was just like, I can't do that to my kids. Like that, it wouldn't be safe for them.
Right.
So one day in 1974, she packed up the car and put my brothers and me in the back seat and drove down that 100-foot long driveway for the last time. And I looked back and I was just so happy to see that house disappearing in the rearview mirror.
Yes. Don't you love that? The rearview mirror is smaller and the windshield is bigger. So when you see a
Yeah.
bigger picture of where you're going, and the past
Yeah.
is farther and farther away. Yeah, I love that. So what happened between 5 and 10? How was that period of time for you?
Well, I was in elementary school and I I got bullied a lot, and there were a couple of factors that played into that. First, I was new in town and I had a single parent, so that
Oh,
automatically, like back then, was a thing that could be worth bullying about.
Right.
Um, and I also I didn't know how to relate to other children because part of the abuse was isolation.
Yes.
So I rarely got to see kids my age and play with them or anything like that. So I got used to relating to adults. And
Right.
so when you try to relate like an adult to another child, it's just, um, and then there was just like, I was just a sad kid. Like I was clearly demonstrating symptoms of PTSD even back then. But again, we're talking about the mid to late 1970s
It
where
hadn't been
PTSD
diagnosed yet.
wasn't even a
Yeah.
diagnosis yet. And
Right.
then when they first applied it, they only applied it to combat veterans.
Hmm.
And it was actually only in the early 80s that people started thinking that people who survived other kinds of violence could also get PTSD because
Yes.
they saw things like survivors of domestic violence, survivors of abuse, people who come from unstable, chaotic families also experiencing these same symptoms. So they finally put two and two together and basically were like, oh yeah,
Yes.
battered women can get PTSD too.
Right. Where's your dad in all of this at this point?
He wasn't around very much. My mother tells me that after they divorced, he had partial custody of us and was able to take us like one weekend a month. But what she told me is that she came down to pick us up one Easter morning, and my father was in bed with his girlfriend, and there were like booze bottles all over the place, and he was like still drunk. And so my, my mother obviously like got us out of there as quickly as possible and was awarded full custody. So after that, I didn't see him much.
Do you have any contact with him anymore?
I tried a couple of times as an adult. What I found was really difficult is that I was trying like because he was my father and he was also a writer like I am. And so I was writing to him. I was kind of bummed out that I had a manuscript rejected from a publisher, and I thought maybe like this guy is a writer, maybe he can understand the process of rejection. I get a letter back that's like, if you're writing for money, you're in it for the wrong reasons.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay.
That's not what you were expecting.
No, and it was actually very painful.
Of course it was.
And
Yeah.
I was about 25, I guess, when I did that.
Uh-huh. He never served any jail time for his actions?
Mm-mm. 1970s domestic, like the first domestic I grew up in Maine, and the first domestic violence shelter in Maine I think was actually established in 1974. Um, and it was in a city about an hour away. So shelters really weren't an option. The reason my mother could get out was that she had some friends from her younger adulthood in New York who were living in Maine also, and she finally worked up the courage to be able to tell them what was going on, and they were like, "Come here,
Yeah.
we will take you, we will give you a bed, we will help you get a place to live." And so she was really fortunate with that.
Yes. So what was the triggering factor about what happened when you were 10 that made you contemplate suicide for the first time?
Um, I experienced, and again, I'm going to put a trigger warning here for CSA,
Yes.
for those of you who know what that means. Um, and basically, I experienced sexual abuse at the hands of a friend of the family.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I didn't even when it actually happened when I was I literally did not remember that this had even happened until I was 23.
Your brain blocked it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then it kind of made sense that a kid who feels totally alone in the world, who's already suffering from PTSD, who doesn't feel safe anywhere, and then like this incident happened while my mother was in the next room talking with her friend, and I I was just frozen. Like I couldn't
For sure.
call out, I couldn't do anything, And I'm sure there was part of me, 10-year-old me, was like, my mother didn't protect me, and angry about that. But I think the biggest thing for me was like, maybe I just deserve to be treated this way. And if this is going to go on for my entire life and people are going to bully me and abuse me and leave me feeling completely alone in the world,
Right.
what's the point of even going on?
Right. So what did you do?
I I spent many, many, many days talking myself out of doing it. And when I was thinking about ways to do it, like my mother's medicine cabinet was practically empty. There was like aspirin, Vicks Vapor Rub, and Band-Aids. I mean, so there were no medications to be used here. Um, so, that left other toxic things that one could ingest. And I just spent so much time thinking about, like, debating with myself, do I do it? Do I not do it? If I do it, like, I don't think my mother will be able to handle it. It would destroy her. Like my teachers would miss me. And so that's kind of what kept me out of doing it. And I never told my mother about any of this until I was probably in my 40s.
Was that the only time you contemplated suicide?
No. When I was in high school, I had a really severe depressive episode about my junior year. And again, it was a lot of like, do I do it? Do I not do it? And I guess I was fortunate in that time because I had begun to get angry.
Mhm.
And sometimes anger is the antidote to, like, because I'd be like, I don't feel like going on anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I would just be like, I am not going to let these bastards make me feel like I don't deserve to exist.
Right. Did you know at that point that you were part of the LGBTQ community?
Oh no, I was so far in the closet. I was in Narnia.
I didn't know if that was, because that time period too.
At a subconscious level, it probably was, but
Mhm.
I mean, in high school, it was the early 1980s, so it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. So
Right.
everything was homophobic. Like you couldn't, I mean, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing like, what is a gay guy in a blank roll AIDS? Gay guy in a wheelchair roll AIDS. Like and like you would hear these kind of jokes all the time, and the worst thing you could be was queer. Like I had friends who were a little more out, who were just barely out, and they literally got beat up.
Yeah, that's
So
so
I had a lot of motivation to hide uh, my queerness even from myself, just
right.
for the sake of survival.
See, my brother is gay, and I knew when he was little, and nobody believed me. And I don't have a relationship with him anymore, and I hate that because he is very much like the golden child in a narcissistic situation. And
Hmm.
I he didn't come out until he was in his 30s to the family. And I knew, and I told him, I said, and like I said, I wish him nothing but the best, but we don't have a relationship because of the family. Nobody, so, was very supportive. My biological dad was like, you're never coming in here. I couldn't have produced this. Da, 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 da. And I was like, as long as you're with somebody who never puts their hand on you in an unwarranted manner, I just want you to be happy. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. Who cares? You're not hurting anybody. Like, and the fact he had to hold
Yeah.
it in and for 30 years had to be, I can't even imagine the pain he was dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's so heart-wrenching. And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't, who cares? It's not bothering Joey Bag of Donuts. It's not bothering this person over here. If you're happy and you're in love and it's a safe relationship, who cares?
I mean, that's the way I feel about it. I mean,
Right.
and I mean, I started coming out when I was in college. Um, and I actually came out to my younger brother. He was the first person in my family I came out to. And um, he was, oh, well, I was about 19 at the time. And I hesitantly told him, and he looked at me and he said, "JaneA, as long as you are able to love it all, that's what matters."
Right. Who cares? And if somebody else has an insecurity or an uncomfortability about it, that's their problem. It's not yours. That is a huge thing. I have friends that are on all the spectrum of the LGBTQ community. And when I say spectrum, I mean, from homosexual to bisexual to non-binary. And that's what I mean by the spectrum. But it doesn't matter. I mean, just because somebody else might say, no, I'm homophobic or whatever they're dealing with, doesn't mean that they don't have the right to have them as friends or let them be happy. Everybody deserves the right to be happy and in love and in a safe relationship.
Mhm.
It just, that's so, and even in today's time, it's so challenging and it's so wrong. I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about your safety because of who you want to be with and who you are.
Yeah. And it's yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I did a TikTok message for um I called it a message of love for trans, non-binary, and queer kids and adults considering suicide. And from that odd bog witch of indeterminate gender who lives in that bungalow 2 houses down the road, the one with the mushroom garden and the cat patio.
Right. Right.
um, and it was, I mean, it's not the most professional piece of TikTok ever made, but it was from the heart, and there were plenty of ums and ahs and
That's
things
all
like
that
that.
matters is
But
it comes from the heart. That's what
yeah,
matters. That's genuine. You can't script genuine,
yeah,
you can't make someone believe that you believe it if it's not real.
yeah.
I mean, that's such a big difference. So up to 2007, I believe it was, that's when you finally received an accurate diagnosis of what's going on with you. Is that right? It was 2007?
Yeah. I I first, when I got health insurance for the first time as an adult at age 30, um, one of the first things I did was to set up counseling.
Good for
And
you.
um, so I set up this counseling, and I had a mental health crisis in which I was suicidal. And my therapist, after all that shook out, diagnosed me with major depressive disorder and suggested that I go on antidepressants. So I did that, and I ended up feeling even weirder. Like the first time I took an antidepressant, I found myself completely unable to sleep. I mean, I would just lie in bed, like listening to my heartbeat and thinking there was something terribly wrong, or and I couldn't unclench my jaw, and I was agitated and suicidal, which is really dangerous.
Right. Not what the
Uh,
medication is supposed to be doing.
yeah.
Right.
Um, but like we figured that out, but then I just kept on having these experiences where like antidepressants would stop working, or I'd have to get on higher and higher doses to make them work. And the odd thing that I experienced when I was on antidepressants is that every time I would take a new one or raise the dose, I'd start feeling the effects right away. And I knew I wasn't supposed to feel any effects for like a couple, 3 weeks. And at the time I was like, well, I guess I'm just lucky like that.
Yeah.
But what I wasn't aware of until a few years later, um, when I finally got the chance to see a psychiatric nurse practitioner who did the whole interview thing. And she said, I don't think this is a unipolar depression. I think it's something on the bipolar spectrum, which is something that I'd sort of begun to suspect anyway.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was put on mood stabilizers for the first time in my life, and um, I was really surprised that I found myself feeling sort of more grounded and less chaotic than I had felt ever before. I mean, I had all this chaos and destruction and craziness going on inside my head, but I think I masked it pretty well.
Mhm.
Um, so, but when I started taking the mood stabilizers, I kind of felt like, you mean I don't have to spend so much energy masking this? Like I can actually just feel this way?
Right. So
So,
were you in a relationship with someone at this point? Did they help you get through it?
no, relationships are a tricky subject for me. I
I'm
just
sorry.
find that, I mean, sort of between being asexual and not really liking to spend hours and hours, and like I don't want to live with another person. And so that kind of makes serious relationships kind of a non-starter.
I got it. I got it. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. No, no, you don't. Um, but what I did have is I had a really supportive online community. I had friends that I had reconnected with through social media. I had friends I met in the course of my career as a blogger, other cat bloggers who just became really good friends. And so I had these people who, although they weren't in my immediate circle, I knew they were out there.
Right.
Um, so I think that helped, but I've always been really kind of familiar with doing everything by myself. I've never once in my life thought like somebody was going to give me something or um, eh, I mean, I'm not used to asking for help, and that's a thing I'm still working on even now.
Right. How do you think having a mental illness affects you in the workplace?
Well, I think what happens is, I mean, um, uh, well, it tends to have a bad effect on my work performance
Mhm.
because as I get more and more depressed, it becomes more and more difficult to sort of keep track of tasks I need to do or to do those tasks as well as I can. And I mean, I literally like almost got fired from a job because of the symptoms of my depressive episode. Um,
That's
and
a challenge.
yeah, so it's difficult, and most of the time the stigma around mental illness is such that it's hard to disclose that to an employer because you never know what's going to happen. Will they be like, okay, that's fine. You're great. We love you and let us know how we can support you, or whether they will like find some bullshit excuse to fire
Right.
you.
Right. So how do you make that decision? Because that's got to be like such an unnerving situation to go to work and be like, how do I feel about disclosing this? How do I feel? And it's hard enough in this world as it is, just in general. And then on top of it, you're like, it's a doggy dog world out there. Do I want to come out and tell them that I have this? And some people don't see mental illness as an actual illness like diabetes or cancer or anything like that. They think
Right,
it's
exactly.
something totally different. And
Yeah,
that's the perception that needs to get changed.
and mental illness and neurodivergence.
Right.
People with living with mental illnesses or people with autism, ADHD, or some other form of neurodivergence are very rarely taken seriously when they request accommodations for their disability.
Right.
Because they're like, well, you don't look disabled. I mean, Lewis over there in the wheelchair is disabled and we'll make accommodations for him, but you?
Right. And that's not fair. That's not right. We need to make such a change on so many levels, on so many things.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really, we do. You are writing your memoir, and I love it. I wrote down the title, Still Alive, Still Smiling. What are you hoping that this will do? What are you hoping to achieve from writing this?
Well, if nothing else, I just want people who have experienced or are experiencing the same things that I did to feel that they're less alone because it's so hard to struggle alone with a mental illness or with a trauma history or, um, uh, I mean, and especially domestic violence as well, because I think a lot of men, at least if my brothers are any example, don't particularly understand the psychology of domestic violence. And so they're like, well, she chose to stay there. And like my older brother, especially because that was the stepbrother my father abused. And so he has a lot of anger toward her for that. Understandably so. But I don't think he understands what kind of effects domestic violence has on a person's mind as well as their body.
Right.
And also the fact that like mom couldn't have even gotten a mortgage if she'd left even like 1 year earlier.
Earlier. Right.
So she was doing the calculus, and I mean, but I mean, I certainly understand feeling a lot of anger if you're being beaten by your stepfather. So I mean, I don't have any bad feelings about him for being that angry. I just kind of wish he understood my mother's situation a little bit better.
Right. Speaking of understanding better, how would you like the general public to understand and help people who do have mental illness going on? How can the general public help and make things easier?
Well, I think the first thing to do is maybe educate yourself about mental illnesses, because a lot of the stigma around mental illness tends to be based on misinformation.
Yes.
Um, and so if you have a friend or a loved one who says, I've just been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, OCD, um, PTSD, anything like that, read about it.
Right.
Read about what you, as someone who is close to a person living with that illness, can do to be supportive, because and read about it from people who actually have lived that experience, because it's a little different when doctor such and such tells you that these are the steps you should take um your friend is having a manic episode. But if you go on like the National Association for Mental Illness blog, and you hear like, my partner went on this big manic episode and decided to buy pizzas for the whole homeless population of Portland, and now we're broke. So but it really helps to learn from people who have lived experience.
Yes. Now you've even had to be hospitalized for this. What was living in the hospital like for this?
Well, I'm really fortunate, I should say right now, because I live in a place, first of all, I have private insurance, so that gives me a lot more access to mental health care than people on Medicaid or Medicare or CHIP. And it shouldn't be that way, but
It
that's the way it
absolutely
is right
shouldn't. Right.
now. And I also live in a large metropolitan area, so I have many therapists and medication management professionals to choose from. And we also have several inpatient facilities around here that are quite good. There's one that was terrible, but um, I only out of 6 hospitalizations, I've only had one flew over the cuckoo's nest experience.
Oh no.
So I figure the odds are I'm doing pretty well compared to what I've heard from a lot of people in other parts of the country if they've had to navigate that.
What was the longest period of time you had to stay hospitalized?
Well, the longest stay I had was a week, and the reason for this is that inpatient behavioral health units are typically meant to be getting the crisis under control. So
Like
it's like
short term.
they stop the bleeding and
Right.
maybe
Short term
put in
care.
1 or 2 stitches by providing you names of therapists and stuff like that. And they also try to connect you with resources outside the program.
Right.
Um, and then, it's kind of up to you to do the rest. But, and there are things like intensive outpatient programs or partial hospitalization programs. And after I was hospitalized last year, I it was just a really traumatic year for so many reasons, and I just couldn't do it anymore. Um, and after I got out of inpatient, I went to a partial hospitalization program for a month. And that's basically an outpatient thing where you stay in your own home, and then every weekday, you go to this place where you do workshops and counseling and meds management and recreational activities and stuff like that. So it's basically like being in the hospital but not having to sleep there.
Got it. I got it. So you credit, I love this, all of your healing and survival to your cats. How did that come about? I love that.
Well, I've loved animals all my life, but I really fell in love with cats when I was about 13 because I begged my mother for weeks for a cat for my birthday.
Hmm.
And so on my birthday in that year, we went over to the town animal shelter and I found a pair of cats. They were twins, little boys, black ones with a little white spot on their chest. Um, and I was like, well, I can't take one and leave the other there. That would be sad. So
Right?
my mother was like, I see your point. And then my little brother, who was also there, had found a dog that he was interested in. So here we were driving home from the shelter with two little kittens and a big dog.
What did you name the twins?
Castor and Pollux after the Gemini twins.
Yeah.
Actually, that was my mother's idea. So but I thought it was cool, so I went with it.
Yeah. So tell me how they've saved you now. Like I saw your beautiful cat earlier before we came on. Oh, and the eyes are just piercing. They're so beautiful.
Well, I think one of the reasons they help me so much is that I, ever since I became an adult, I have viewed adopting and taking care of cats or any animals as a sacred responsibility. Like I wanted to do everything right. When I was 25 and I adopted my first cats of my adult life, they were black cats, and I named them Susie Mew and Sinead Kitty after two of my favorite singers.
I love that. Love that.
um, but um, but I viewed that as a sacred responsibility, and when I adopted these cats, I promised them that I'd be with them for their entire lives. And I also actually had, I knew of a man who died by suicide, and his cat was alone with his body for several days before anybody came to check in on him. And this poor cat was so traumatized. Like the person who took this kitty on was a real well-known sort of cat behaviorist and veterinary homeopath, and she did everything she could to try and help this cat. But by the time she moved away, this cat was still hiding all the time and really reluctant to get human touch. So I saw this cat suffering, and so I thought about, well, if I died by suicide and my cats were left with my body for a few days, or even just like half an hour with me being dead, I think that it would be so traumatic. Like I couldn't bear to inflict that kind of trauma.
Yeah. Oh, so they give you purpose.
Yeah,
That's amazing. I want you to tell everybody how they can find you. Your book is going to launch the beginning of the year, next year,
mid next year, I think probably.
and next year, and you're going to come back and we're
I
going to
would love to.
talk about it again and promote it because it needs to be promoted. Tell everybody where they can find you until then.
Well, first of all, I have a website that is janeakelley.com, JaneAKelley.com. I'm on TikTok is at JaneA Kelley, JaneAKelley. I'm on Instagram as at Pause and Effect, PAWSANDEFFECT. And I kind of keep my Facebook stuff more sort of personal, so I don't have like a persona on Facebook, so to speak.
Understandable. Understandable. Thank you so much for finding the time to be here with us today. I've enjoyed every minute with you. You are amazing. And I'm so proud of everything you've overcome. And look what you're doing now. It's amazing.
Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope that something I've said has been of benefit to one of your listeners, or maybe more. Um, but yeah, I want to keep being a voice for DV survivors, people who live with mental illnesses, um, because they don't get the kind of care that they typically need, especially like, as I mentioned before, if they're on state funded health insurance like
Right.
Medicaid. Um, So it feels really important to me to advocate and help these individuals get the best care they can in the situation they have.
Yes. Well, on behalf of all of them, let me say thank you, because you're helping. Trust me, you're making a difference. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.